This is Indigenous Insights, special topics, missing and murdered Indigenous women. We're in the studio once again to bring you a real story featuring real people. Missing and murdered Indigenous women is being brought out into the light more and more, and it's due to the actions of many different people across the continent. We produce these episodes to do our part. My name is Mitch Bolo. I'm a member of the Keweenaw Bay Indian community. I work at our tribal-owned radio stations. Also here with us is Ariel Faulds. She's also a member of the KBIC, and she works in Indigenous Victim Services. And she's my sister. I don't know why I feel like I have to throw that in there, but ready for another one, Ariel?
Yep.
All right, so other than airing on the KBIC's airwaves, let people know where else they can find us.
We post all of these stories on our Indigenous Insights MMIW YouTube channel, and you can find us on Twitter and Facebook as well.
Okay, very good. Okay, so Ariel, bring us into this week's story.
This week we're going to be talking about Tiffany Morrison. She was 24 years old when she went missing almost 13 years ago from the Ganawage Mohawk territory in Quebec.
24 years old, Tiffany Morrison.
Yep, and Ganawage is about 20 kilometers southwest of Montreal, which is the largest city in Quebec. And so that kind of gives you it's not far out of a huge city.
Okay.
But 4 years after she was last seen, her remains were found partially covered with branches by a construction worker in a wooded area near the Mercier Bridge, the bridge that links Montreal to the Ganawage Reserve. And her remains were found just a 10-minute walk from her home.
A 10-minute walk from her home, but it was 4 years after she was last seen.
Yeah.
Okay, so this is one of those cases where we do in fact have some remains.
Yep.
So Tiffany Morrison, 24 years old, she went missing around 13 years ago, and her remains were found 4 years later. So, well, what year is that?
In 2010, they found her remains, and she went missing on June 18th, 2006.
All right, just 10 minutes away from her home. Go on.
But Tiffany's family has described her as being the energy of her family. She was the mother of a 4-year-old girl, and she would always brighten people's day. She enjoyed going on adventures off-roading in her 4x4 along the St. Lawrence River. And her sister remembers in the spring before she went missing when Tiffany came and picked her up to take her to the mountain and told her she'd help her forget about what's bothering her. And her sister has said that that is the epitome of who Tiffany was.
Oh, wow. Okay, so, are you noticing the pattern here in a lot of these stories? We are getting some really, I don't even know what the word is, really caring, almost bouncy people sometimes. I wonder if it's, I don't want to say it's a personality type, but a lot of times these people are really, really outgoing, it sounds like.
Yeah, and their family, their family thinks that they're funny and they're nice and they're caring. And I think that can explain a lot of people, but it's just, yeah.
Yeah, I wonder if it's the family, anyone would describe anybody in their family like that, or if that's that type of personality is attracting more people or something. It's not their fault, of course, but there's a certain personality type. There's a certain personality type we're running across here.
Yeah.
All right, so give us a few more of those details. So her sister remembers, what was that?
The spring before she went missing, Tiffany came and picked her up and took her to the mountain and said she'd help her forget about what's bothering her. And they just went out there and they went mountain climbing, she called it, and that was in her 4x4. So
I see.
She enjoyed being outside in nature, and that's how she kind of, forgot about her problems for a bit.
So her sister was having a tough time, so Tiffany went and picked her up and took her out for a weekend. Yeah. Okay, I see.
I don't know about a weekend, but at least a little bit.
Yeah, okay. When for an outing or something like that. I see. Yeah, that takes somebody going above and beyond to be nice like that.
Yeah.
All right. I almost hate to dig into the heavier details here, but go ahead and continue.
On June 18th, 2006, just before midnight, Tiffany was last seen getting into a taxi after leaving the Haraki pub in LaSalle, Quebec, which is a neighborhood in Montreal. And it was about a 10-minute drive away from Tiffany's home on Ganawage Reserve.
Ken, about how far away is that from where her remains were found?
Well, about a 10-minute drive.
Yeah, is that 10 minutes in the same direction? Is that
no, because it was well, kind of, because they were found by that bridge that connects Montreal with the Ganawage Reserve. So they had to passed by that same area. But it was only 10 minutes away, a 10-minute walk from Tiffany's home, so it was like all in the same little area there.
Oh, yeah, that's right. It was a 10-minute walk, and this is a 10-minute drive where she was last seen. Yeah. Okay, and she was leaving a pub?
Yep.
And this was in 2006. Oh, just before midnight, you had mentioned.
Yep, on June 18th, 2006.
All right, so somewhat late, but not terribly late.
Yeah, I mean, that's a decent time to leave a bar.
yeah, and actually, that's an early night sometimes. Okay, so...
another man in her community, or from her community, also got into the taxi, and the taxi was to take them both back to the reserve. But Tiffany never made it home that night, and her family reported her missing within a few days. And like we found in other missing person cases, the police didn't think it was as serious as the family did. And the family told the police it wasn't like Tiffany not to check in, especially with her daughter, and tell her daughter when she would be coming home.
Okay, so Tiffany had a daughter?
Yes, a 4-year-old daughter.
A 4-year-old daughter. Okay, let me back up to get some questions in here. Who was the guy that got into the vehicle with her? Was it a boyfriend, just a friend?
It's stated as another man from the community, so just another person from the Ganawage Reserve.
Okay, so, my first question would be, what did he say happened that night? If she never made it home, they both got seen getting in a taxi?
He told the police that the taxi driver dropped him off first, and the taxi was taking Tiffany home next, and that he doesn't remember any specific details about the driver, and he also refused to take a polygraph test.
Oh, okay. You're starting to get quicker where you know my questions.
Which we talked about before, that in itself can't really be suspicious.
Yeah, the polygraph one, I almost don't even register that in my head anymore because you try to put yourself in these situations where these people could be innocent. It's innocent till proven guilty or whatever, and if they're innocent and the police are thinking they did it or leaning that way, it'd be a little bit scary to go in and take a polygraph test. Because what if you're just so nervous?
Yeah, absolutely. And that the taxis that had regular routes that went between Montreal and the Ganawage Reserve would often turn their meters off when they were taking people to and from and just pocket the money. So it wasn't able to be tracked, like what taxi went there that night.
Okay, so they don't know the taxi company or the taxi driver or anything.
Right. Okay. Not immediately, and this was part of the Ganawage Peacekeepers investigation, and the Peacekeepers was the agency that was in charge of Tiffany's disappearance until her remains were found, and that's equivalent to like a tribal police.
Okay. So let's go back to the document here. It said that the family reported her missing within a few days. Why did it take a few days to report her missing?
I don't know exactly the exact date she was reported missing. I couldn't find that. I think it's kind of like that, described as vague as that in different articles. And it wasn't because they didn't think that something happened to her or anything. It was kind of just like, okay, by the time they realized something was wrong, they reported it right away. Okay,
I see. Because, I mean, she has a 4-year-old daughter. You need to be known where you're at pretty much all times if you're a parent like that.
Right, and that's the biggest thing that the family told the police is that she has a daughter and she would check in with her. At least check in.
Okay, so let's continue on from there then. Is there any
well,
other details?
Years after she disappeared, and I wasn't able to tell if this was after or before her remains were found, but the family received a tip that she was last seen getting into a taxi from the Angignon taxi company, and that company didn't keep records dating back to 2006.
Oh,
so
okay.
It was shown a witness came forward saying that this is the taxi company that she got into that night, but they don't have any records.
No records.
Yeah, like no records at all. And it was a few years later, so it's like, do taxi companies normally keep their records for more than a few years? So I don't think anything super suspicious from that.
Yeah, and this was 2006 where there was, good technology around everything, but maybe record keeping wasn't the same. I mean, there was no Uber or any of that kind of stuff back in 2006 yet. Or was there?
I don't think so.
We're from small towns, you can tell.
Yeah, I've only taken an Uber a few times, so.
I mean, there were screens in cars and stuff already, but you know, they might not have those records.
Yeah, and especially if the taxi turned off its meter when it picked up Tiffany, then they wouldn't have a record of that anyways.
Okay, so where does that take us then?
Well, after they found out that, and that led them to a dead end, and then after they questioned the man that Tiffany was with, or got in the taxi that night, they kind of hit a dead end, and they were waiting for more tips or someone to come forward with information. But then when her remains were found, I'm going to probably slaughter this word because it's French, but it's the Sûreté du Québec took over, and that is like the equivalent of like a state police force.
Okay.
In Quebec.
So, is that because it's their jurisdiction, or is it because the peacekeepers requested them to come in?
I think it's because it's of the crime. It automatically got transferred to a higher investigating agency.
All right, so
and it seems like that's like the norm.
Okay.
But it took a year for the case to actually be transferred over to them.
A year?
Yeah.
So they found the remains and there was just a paperwork delay for a year?
Yeah.
Oh, man.
And then by then, it had been 5 years since Tiffany was last seen, and the remains were left in the elements for who really knows how long, but the exact cause of death couldn't be determined, and presumably neither could any physical evidence from the area where Tiffany's remains were found.
Wait a minute. So they found the body and the case was transferred, but they just left the body while it was being transferred over that year?
No, like over the time that she was missing, like her remains, it wasn't like a body that they found. They found her remains.
So it'd just be, scatter bones after 4 years.
Yeah. So then just that another year is while it's being transferred, and they weren't looking into it at all, but that evidence, it didn't just sit there the whole time. Like, it was collected.
Oh, okay. But they weren't able to get anything from that.
Right, and they couldn't even determine a cause of death.
Well, oh man. So where do we go from there then? I mean, it's about a 10-minute walk from her house. She was last seen a 10-minute drive away from her house.
Well, from what I've found, there hasn't been any solid developments since Tiffany's remains were found.
So what about the family? Has the family been making any efforts to try to get more awareness going here? Have they just kind of accepted it?
Well, they were told that if they came up with any ideas, that the peacekeepers would look into it, and this was while she was still missing. And the family thinks that was wrong because they shouldn't leave it up to the family to decide where the investigation is going to go. And the family also feels that the peacekeepers' training wasn't good enough to be in charge of a missing persons investigation at that time. And at one point, they discouraged the family from organizing their own community search to complement police searches.
Oh, really? So
yeah.
They did have a pretty big opinion about that police force there.
Yeah, and Tiffany's sister, Melanie, has been very active in spreading awareness about missing and murdered Indigenous women, and she shares the story of her sister a lot, and she hopes that what happened to her family doesn't happen to another. And she has been very outspoken about how she thinks the peacekeepers failed in finding Tiffany and investigating it properly. But her and the peacekeepers today still have worked together and changing their policies and protocols within their own community to make sure that if something like this happens again, that they'll know how to handle it better.
Okay, so I mean, I guess that's a good thing there. There's progress.
Yeah, because she was, it must have been really hard to go to the same agency that you feel failed your sister and say, let me help you.
Yeah, absolutely.
And in 2017, Melanie was recognized by Amnesty International for her advocacy and has served as a part of the Family Advisory Circle for the National Inquiry into Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women.
Oh, wow.
But yeah, and she hasn't testified at any of those hearings because it could impact Tiffany's case, but she is present, and she's like an advocate for the other family members that are coming to testify about what happened with them and their missing loved one.
Man, and you're seeing that out there a little bit. Another sort of pattern that's developing. We both have Bernadine Bearheels on our Facebook, the mother of Brittany Tiger, who is a similar case to this. She went missing and her remains were found. And her mom is almost an activist these days. I mean, she's a part of different she's involved with different organizations down there and stuff.
Oh yeah, and she's using what happened to her to help other people, and I think it takes a special kind of person to do that.
Yep, I mean it's unfortunate that that's what it took for some of these people to find their strength, but they are just the strong people out there, just doing that work.
In 2018, Melanie stated that there was still work being done in Tiffany's case, and that they were still bringing in information.
Currently, there is activity coming in. There's people that call in with information, so it's still active, which is really good that this far in the future there's still work being done. And that's, I think, is contributed to by my efforts of raising awareness for my sister and missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls as a whole. I fought to have the media's view on women, Indigenous women, to be changed, because at the time my sister went missing, there was no help from the media. Paper, TV, they didn't want nothing to do with it because it was an Indigenous individual. There has been a long history of fighting to get our stories heard the way they should be heard, and at the pace that it should be done when they're still missing at the beginning, because it's crucial that you find where they were while it's fresh in people's minds so that they can remember stuff to help you.
Is it your hope that the inquiry, bringing these stories to light, bringing this all to light, will help?
There's a lot that they're looking at, but they can make the suggestions and the recommendations, but it's still up to our government and our police forces to implement and work from there. So there's still a lot of work to be done. Leading up to this inquiry, like I said, since 2006, when my sister went missing, I started learning about all these other families that were going through the same situation. We weren't alone. And I'm hoping with this inquiry, the national inquiry that's happening, that we're going to be able to take those steps to implement a better response when somebody goes missing that's Indigenous, and if somebody's murdered. Yeah, so there's less of a delay in getting the help.
You mentioned in 2010 when Tiffany's body was found, it was turned over to the SQ then. Have they been following up on leads? Have they been in touch with you and keeping you abreast of the investigation?
With the SQ, I've had a good experience with previous investigators. There's still a line of communication, it's just not personal anymore, but we can still get updates.
If you have any information regarding the disappearance or death of Tiffany Morrison, please contact the Sûreté du Québec.
This is Indigenous Insight, Special Topics: Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women. Today we remember Tiffany Morrison. She disappeared when she was 24 years old, almost 13 years ago was the last time she was seen. Her remains were found 4 years later. This is Mitch behind the mic. Also joining us on the air, we have
Ariel.
And Ariel, you mentioned the national inquiry into missing and murdered Indigenous women. Can you explain a little bit more about what that is?
The national inquiry was started in 2016, and the government was tasked a commission to examine the systemic causes of all forms of violence against Indigenous women, girls, and members of the LGBTQ2S community in Canada. So this was, I believe, in September 2016, and by mid-2017, there were many criticisms of the inquiry that Indigenous people brought forward. Numerous different leaders of the inquiry resigned, and in total, to date, there's been well over 20 people that have either resigned or been fired from the commission.
Oh, wow.
And all of the people that are on this commission are Indigenous people.
Yep.
And the inquiry says that they've heard from, as of 2017, they had heard from 763 witnesses at 11 different community hearings and 1 expert hearing, and they had gathered an additional 276 statements from people who either weren't at the hearings or didn't testify in the hearings.
Okay, so they're getting some work done.
That's what it seems like, but there is a lot of criticisms about that, and I'll go into it a little bit here. In July 2017, so not even a year after the inquiry started, the Assembly of First Nations, which is a Canada-wide thing, passed a resolution asking the federal government to reset the inquiry and alter the mandate and process. The Grand Chief of the Manitoba, I will probably not say this right, the Kiiwetinowi Okimakanak,
Kiiwetinowi Okimakanak,
called for the resignation of the Chief Commissioner of the inquiry, who sits on British Columbia's provincial court and is a member of the Miigwetch First Nation. Miigwetch?
I'm guessing, because with my language learning, there's a certain rhythm all these go to. Miigwetch. What language is that?
I don't know.
Huh. Okay, well, side note there.
I know that there's, well, around where I live, there's a lot of Mohawk, but I think out west it's different. Kind of like similar to how the U.S., is. Oh, yeah. Out west, there's more different dialects of different languages.
I'm sure. I mean, that could be a whole special topics thing there, just these different tribes and different cultures out there. The Miigwetch First Nation.
Yeah. But before that, an open letter that was signed by more than 30 advocates, Indigenous leaders, and family members urged the inquiry to mitigate the damage that they've already done and fundamentally shift their approach. When the inquiry was created, it was created for that, what I had said, to see what the government did wrong, basically. But it was very broad. And it seems like it was almost impossible to cover that whole thing because it goes so deep.
Yeah.
And it goes so far back. But the commissioners that led the inquiry, all Indigenous commissioners, they have different views about what they think the inquiry should look and feel like. So the time that they spent where they were supposed to be starting to hold hearings, they were spending that designing the inquiry as well. So one of the people who resigned from the inquiry said she's heard it been described as they were building a car and driving it at the same time. And she said, well, call me crazy, but if you do that, you're going to crash.
Okay. So see, that simple analogy summed it all up for me. I understand what they're saying there. Same time, though, when you're doing work like this, especially in Native America, sometimes there's no foundation to the work that you're trying to do. So sometimes you got to build that car while you're trying to drive it. I mean, I understand both sides of that.
Yeah, a little bit, but I don't know, because it seems like they are kind of like rushing them to get started and finish and not taking into consideration that all these Indigenous commissioners that are leaders in their communities and leaders not even just in Canada, across the world, are saying this is what we need and we need it to be designed a certain way.
Yeah, that's true.
And they weren't letting them do that.
Yep. See, that's where it all falls off the track then right there. I mean,
and it seems like they've been able to gather information that they should be gathering from the hearings and stuff. And in February 2018, they said they weren't able to begin the forensic review of police files due to technological challenges. But several police agencies across Canada have said they weren't contacted to provide records. So I don't know what's going on there.
Actually, are they just trying to make it look good on paperwork? They have those stats of all the people they talked to. They collected the minimal information and whatnot, but they're not really going for it then, or what?
Well, I don't think so. I think I read that they were given outdated computers and phones and stuff to do their work, so that might have be part of the problem there. Okay. And maybe it wasn't the police not providing them; it was them literally not being able to open the files.
Okay,
that could be part of the problem.
So they were ill-equipped.
Yeah.
People with good intention, and they were ill-equipped. That's what's happening here?
Yeah.
Okay.
I think so. And on March 6th, 2018, the inquiry requested a 2-year extension to complete what it was created to do. And the government gave them a 6-month extension.
A 6-month extension?
Yeah, so
instead
25% of the time.
Yeah, instead of the 2 year.
They were requesting. And the inquiry finished its final hearings in December 2018, along with that 6-month extension timeline. And in that 6 months, they heard from nearly 1,500 family members over 15 community hearings. And the final report is expected sometime this month.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So This is still it's happening. And the final report will offer practical recommendations that are actionable with firm timelines for the government to implement them.
So explain that last sentence. to make it easier for me to understand?
So the commission gathered information from different communities and different family members that have been affected by violence and missing and murdered Indigenous women, and they are compiling that into a report to tell the government, this is what you need to do to start fixing this.
Okay. So in the beginning of these episodes, we've mentioned how there are no accurate statistics out there, but now we're actually getting some real numbers, some real studies here.
So I'm not sure if it's so much as numbers as so much as people's experiences, and the Indigenous people's experiences that historically nobody in the government listens to.
All right, so I mean that's progress then.
Yeah, they'll at least be able to get some of their information out. I don't think they'll be able to finish it, or the report won't contain everything that they want it to contain, and it won't cover every issue that Indigenous communities face, but it's a start.
Yeah, the word that they used was actionable. That's the word. That's the key word there.
Yeah, so they're not recommending like fix the child welfare system. They're saying this is what you need to do to fix the child welfare system.
I see. So that's something that's happening in Canada, right?
Right.
Is there anything like that happening in the U.S.?
No. I think there's been a couple of pushes for it, and I think Senator Deb Haaland from New Mexico, I think she's a senator. Oh gosh, she might be a representative. But she was one of the first Native American women to be elected into U.S. Congress.
Yep, we talked about her on the show.
Yep, and she is trying to bring missing and murdered Indigenous women issues to the forefront in Congress. So there is work being done, but it's not to the point where the government's like, yes, we need to look into this more.
Well, I mean, and it should be, because, I mean, they should take a look at Canada, which shares the same, First Nations population type of deal, and it's a prevalent thing up there, so why is it not? Oh, yeah, see. These episodes just get me fired up sometimes.
Oh, yeah.
Okay,
especially like reading about this, like the inquiry, it's like when it was first created and first said that this is what's going to be made and this is what's going to happen, it seems like it gave Indigenous communities and the families that have been affected by violence and murder and missing people, it gave them a little bit of hope, but it's like it fell apart from the beginning. So it got them hopeful and then just let them down right away. So that's really sad to see.
Yeah, it is.
And it kind of seems like, if the government wants this inquiry to happen and really cares about the institutional problems that have led to the high rates of violence and murder among the communities, then they should be allowing the Indigenous people that are on this commission and are leading this inquiry to have the time and the money to design the inquiry how they feel it will best help Indigenous people.
But well, the report's coming out, so we'll have to see if they take that report or not, or what?
Well, they're gonna take the report. Who knows if they're actually gonna do the things that they're recommending? But they still didn't give them They're saying we care about Indigenous issues and we want to know what the federal government has done wrong. But then they're saying if you don't have this done in 6 months, then it's left out.
So they're saying we really care what you have to say, and we know you want 2 years, but you have 6 months.
Pretty much.
Okay, I'm getting you.
They should be giving these people because otherwise it's part of the problem from the beginning. They're not listening to Indigenous people.
Yep. So, I mean, it's just kind of the same old story of what caused some of this stuff in the first place. Yeah.
And in its design, it's supposed to offer counseling support for family members who are called to testify and, re-bring up everything that they've been through and what happened with them. But many of those families have said that they haven't gotten any type of support after they've testified.
Okay, so then the organization is able to get what they want, but they can't offer the other services or the other support?
Yeah, and I think that's on the government's end because that's a money issue.
Oh, okay. So that's just another show of lack of support.
Yeah. So it's if you come to testify and tell us how we can help, we'll give you the necessary aftercare type stuff.
Yeah.
But they didn't follow through on that.
It kind of reminds me of Well, I don't know what I've seen it on where people are in the hospital getting treated all good, but as soon as the hospital finds out they don't have insurance or something, they say, all right, see you later.
Yeah.
It's just kind of a fake customer service type of thing, taking care of everything on the outside, but not really caring.
Yeah. And did make it seem like they're going to be good government leaders within the federal government. In my opinion, it kind of seems like they've been pretending to care and trying to force a product that won't be able to cover everything that it should be covering. So
what about when this report comes out? What's going to happen then?
Hopefully the government takes that plan that they have and saying this is what you need to do by this time, and then start doing this by this time, and they'll start to fix the problems within like the government right now, even still that's affecting Indigenous communities.
So if you're thinking about what they're going to do and you think about the swing that they usually take when they're doing something, what do you think we're going to get out of this? Or, the people are going to get out of this? I mean, what's the government actually going to do?
It kind of, I don't want to seem like I'm having a negative opinion on the work that they've done, because that's not what it is. It's just that I don't think the government cares enough to say, okay, we're going to follow what you're recommending. Okay,
so do you think this will at least get, a foot in the door a little bit, where maybe more work can continue and more data collection can continue?
Hopefully. And I mean, some of the things are, like I said, that fixing the child welfare system, that's separating Indigenous children from their parents and taking them away from their communities, which causes more bad than good for the long run.
Yeah.
And then another part of it is addressing the 60s scoop, where they came and took Indigenous people from their families and put them in residential schools, and addressing the problems that arose from that, because the government hasn't done that.
Oh, yeah, for sure. I mean, Canada had an apology a while back, but that, just like the inquiry here, was not received well. It seemed more like a cash payout, people said.
Yeah.
And America hasn't offered anything.
It's like the government said sorry, but they didn't do anything about it.
Yep, and I think I read, too, if that you did take that cash from the government, then, even legally it made it so you could never... It just was basically the government having a legal settlement. It was paying them off so that way they can't be liable for it anymore.
Yeah.
Okay, so Ariel, as we get kind of closer here to wrapping things up, is there anything else we need to go over here?
Well, I mentioned that, the government isn't listening to Indigenous people. And I think a very good example of what happens when you listen to the people that are affected by the problems is how Tiffany's sister went to the Ganawage police that failed her and said, this is how I can help you. And they listened.
Yeah.
I think that's a perfect example of letting Indigenous people speak for themselves and do their, bring their problems to the forefront without trying to quiet them.
Yeah, I mean, when you get people working with people, usually it works out good. There's something with, I'm not even sure what the term is, where it's across paperwork, where it's across email, where it's across people talking to other people, where it gets lost. Like, you hear about somebody who calls for customer service to complain or return something, and then they just get thrown on hold and thrown around a bunch of different people the whole time. When people work with people, it seems like things work out better. Because people are good. People are good. It seems like these big organizations are arranged in such a way where it doesn't work out for the people so much.
Yeah, because they don't have a voice when they like to pretend that they're listening and that they're going to take what they're hearing into consideration, but they don't even listen.
Yeah, because I mean, maybe it's I don't know if it's because they don't care. It's because they don't think there's anything that they can do from their position.
I don't know either.
So I don't know. Yeah, it's hard to say. I mean, I go back all the time to that first story where the cop or the police officer, detective, whatever he was, in that case in the 80s. And then, many years later, he dove back into it as a civilian and did all that research and looked into it on his own because he didn't feel right with it. I mean, people individually, they are good. And it feels like there's so many people out there trying to do this good work. And there's just some unseen force holding things back.
Yeah. all the good people that resigned from the commission.
Yep, exactly. I mean, what could have happened if they all stayed and they all moved everything in that direction that it was supposed to be moved in and stuff like that? Just, geez, these stories.
Yeah, all of those leaders that are recognized across the world, some of them are recognized across the world. Yeah, it's hard to think about what if the government just would have listened to them, where this could have ended up.
Well, I guess all we have is that hope.
Yeah.
Just gotta keep hoping.
Yeah, hope that the government listens and does better.
Can we expect an update then once that report comes out? Are you going to be looking for that?
Oh yeah, I got Google Alerts set for it. I'm gonna read the whole thing.
Oh my goodness. And that's why we do these episodes, because, you know, like I mentioned before, you're passionate about this. It's something you do in your free time.
Yeah.
All right, so once again, you can find these episodes on YouTube, Facebook, Twitter. We're on Eagle Radio in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, KBIC's tribal-owned radio stations. My name is Mitch.
I'm Ariel.
And is there anything else, Ariel, that we need to get out there today?
I think that's it.
That's about it. All right, so once again, today we remember Tiffany Morrison. She disappeared almost 13 years ago when she was 24 years old. Her remains were found 4 years later. Her case is unsolved. And it's just another one of the stories that we can add to our Indigenous Insight Special Topics library. And just one of the, I don't even know what number to use, Ariel, thousands of cases out there.
At least.
This is Indigenous Insights, Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women.